Hello everybody, it's Courtney and welcome to day number 1 of my 5 cards 1 kit for the Simon Says Stamp August 2018 card kit. I am starting off here with a piece of the pattern paper from the kit, and I cut that down to just slightly smaller than an A2 size card, and I used the patched layers die from Waffle Flower. And I'm just going to stamp out 2 of these little planters here. So I stamped my first one and masked that out with Simon Says Stamp masking paper. And I just cut the one edge of it. I didn't have to cut the whole thing. And I didn't worry about the little stems that are kind of hanging out. And next I went ahead and stamped out my second little planter right directly next to the first. And I'm going to be doing Copic coloring right over the pattern paper. Now this is not a cardstock that you would typically use for coloring, so you don't want to over blend here. So I'm going to be starting off with my darkest colors first. I'm going to try to stick to either a 2 or 3 color blend so that it doesn't bleed through. I used my packaging here as a guide. There's like scripty words on this piece of pattern paper, so it's kind of hard to see a little bit where the image starts and ends. So I'm just using the packaging as a guide. Started off with my leaves, starting with my darkest color, and I'm using 3 different colors here because these are kind of larger leaves. Going on to my mid-tone and then my highlight just on the very tips. I didn't really have a problem blending on this paper. I've colored on pattern paper before, and as long as you don't lay out too much color, you should be fine. There shouldn't be any bleeding. Now there's also these little tiny leaves in this planter as well, and I'm just using 2 colors here, starting off with my darkest and just adding a little tiny flick right in the center of those leaves, and then the base of these little buds. I'm just using 1 single color. For these larger leaves over on this other planter here, I'm going to use the same 2 colors as I did for these little tiny ones, but I'm going to add in a darker color as well. I'm going to bring in a G28, and I'm going to start with that darkest color. These leaves are kind of folded on themselves, so the darkest area will be in that area where they are kind of folded and in the center of the leaves. The outer part of the leaves will be the darkest. I'm going to use the same colors to color the little stems as well. And for my mid-tone, I'm going to bring out that dark color almost to the edge and leaving that little area where the leaf is kind of folded just strictly for my highlight. Next, for my flowers, I'm not sure if these are all the same type of flower. It kind of looks like a peony to me. I'm going to color them all the same using 2 different R markers, and I'm going to bring in an RV11. I typically would use an R81, but it's dried up, and an RV11 is almost identical to that color, so I'm going to use that instead. Again, starting off with my darkest color, concentrating on where the petals lie over another petal. And I'm just really putting just a line here. I'm not really worrying about flicking out until I reach my mid-tone, which is my R83. And I'll flick out almost to the edge of each petal, just leaving a small area for my highlight. And when I bring in my RV11, I'm just going over it very quickly. Like I said, I don't want to overblend, and the RVs are a little difficult, especially if you're mixing them with an R marker, so you just want to go over that really quickly. Now for these other 2, I'm going to speed this up a little bit. I colored them the same exact way. These petals, there's so many of them in this larger flower, that there's not a lot of real estate to work with here. So I'm basically just laying out one line of my dark color, and I'm basically going to do the same thing when I go in with my mid-tone, just extending that line out a little bit. I'm not really using any flicking motions like I normally do. These petals are just too tiny to do that with. The pattern within the pattern paper is going to hide any mistakes that you may make. So if you can't really see where the shadows and highlights will be, you don't really have to worry about it. Nobody's going to notice if you mess up a highlight or a shadow on these particular flowers. Next, for the planters themselves, I'm going to be using some gray markers here. I'll start out with my warm grays for this smaller pot here, and I'm going to make it look round by adding my shading to either side, and then underneath the little top part of that where it would hang over the middle. Next, I'll go in with my W5 marker and just extend those flicks a little bit. When you want to make something look round, your highlight number 1 will be in the center, but you also want to, when you're flicking out, you want to vary your flicks. You don't want them to be all the same length. This will make it look round, and also this works for any object that you may want to look maybe shiny a little bit. Next, for this taller planter, I'm going to move on to my C markers, and I'm coloring this the same exact way, starting off with my C7 and concentrating on either side being the darkest, as well as where these flowers kind of hang over the planter. One is part of the stamp and one is from that other stamp that we had initially masked out. You want to make sure that you create a shadow there as well. I'm pretty much leaving the center of these planters white. It's not really white, but the color of the pattern paper, so you don't have to worry about that 4th highlight color. And next, I will move on to my sentiment, and I apologize here, I forgot to zoom out, so I'm a little close up here. But I am going to use the thank you stamp from the Mandy's Flowers stamp set, and I'm using VersaFine Onyx Black ink here, and I'll be using some clear embossing powder over it. And I stamp that kind of diagonally, and then I will add this little mini sentiment where it will say thank you for your kindness. I'm going to go ahead and stamp that flat. I wasn't sure how well this would stand out once I embossed it, but you could actually read it even between the little scripty words on the pattern paper. I'm using Hero Arts clear embossing powder here, and I'll go ahead and heat set that. Next, I realized I forgot to color this little center of the flower, so I'm just going to be using some YR markers to color that in. Last, I took a dark gray card base here, and I can't remember the color of the cardstock, but it's by Simon Says Stamp, and I will link it on my blog. And I went ahead and adhered that flat down onto that A2 size card base, and that is it for card number 1. Thank you so much for stopping by, and stop back again tomorrow for day number 2.